Hello, National University students, CSET prep students, and World History A, US History B students. Continuing lecture on World War II. US occupation of Japan. But before we get to that, dropping of the atomic bomb. So we just finished up with discussion of Blitzkrieg, Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and review of the Holocaust, continuing with the atomic bomb. The war in Europe ended in May 1945, but waged on in the Pacific. U.S. General MacArthur gained ground in his island-hopping campaign. Basically cut off, you wouldn't take each island one after the other. You would go to one of the islands of the Pacific, skip one, go to the next, so you could cut off the supply lines and the communications, thereby more efficiently making it impossible for the enemy to communicate with themselves and get disorganized. Then you could isolate those smaller or set aside islands and then slowly take them over instead of trying to do it all at once linearly. Fall of Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Could recommend Letters of Iwo Jima, or Letters from Iwo Jima, is that what it is? Good movies, Clint Eastwood, director. U.S. bombers access to Japanese main islands. President Truman issued a vague warning and then dropped the first world's atomic bomb on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. When Japan did not surrender, he dropped the second on Nagasaki on August 9, 1945, 3 days later. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. August 8, 1945, the result of these combined efforts was the surrender of Japan, announced by Emperor Hirohito on August 15, 1945, and the subsequent U.S. occupation of Japan until 1952. On the U.S. occupation of Japan, following Japan's unconditional surrender in World War II, Japan was occupied by U.S. forces under General Douglas MacArthur. MacArthur ensured that Japan's transformation would benefit the United States and its allies. This kicks in the Marshall Plan, the rebuilding of Europe, rebuilding of Japan, rebuilding of Germany, chiefly through the consumerism and spike in our economy, the U.S. consumer footing the bill, the U.S. taxpayer footing the bill for the Marshall Plan. A new constitution adopted in 1947 instituted democratic reforms in Japan and Germany. The emperor retained his title, that is, the Japanese emperor retained his title, but had no military or political power. The country developed a parliamentary democracy. Japan's military was severely limited, although the nation was permitted to create a self-defense force in 1954. The occupation ended in 1952, although the United States still maintains bases in Japan. We all know that. In fact, some of you may have friends, relatives, loved ones based there or in Germany or other places in Europe, Iceland, around the globe. Following U.S. occupation, Japan's resources were committed to the course of aggressive industrialization. As a result, today, Japan is one of the world's economic superpowers, and we know that yen is often ahead of the dollar, although the dollar is now making a little bit of a comeback, despite the economy being as it is right now. On this 12th of December 2008. Okay, so Japan is now accepted the unconditional surrender. MacArthur is essentially the Emperor of Japan, strangely. He actually held that title for a short time because they weren't sure what to call him. MacArthur, as you know, will later on go on to face challenges in North Korea and make some very decisive maneuvers there and make a name for himself in North Korea. He will battle Truman's judgments, and they'll get into a bit of a spat over how to proceed in North Korea. But more importantly, to wrap up our section on World War II, At the end of World War II, the United Nations is created as a coalition decided or dedicated to maintaining world peace and security. An improvement on the League of Nations, and as with any chiefly diplomatic entity that tries to solve problems by gathering consensus among nations that have very divergent and sometimes opposed goals for themselves. It's going to be a tough job, but it's an improvement over the League of Nations. Had more power and influence, and of course the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, most of us know those. We have China, Great Britain, United States, Soviet Union, France. And in 1944, before the war was over, a final version was solidified in San Francisco in 1945, making this United Nations official. Today, the focus is to provide humanitarian assistance around the world to areas in need through a variety of organizations. So of course, you know, in areas like Sudan right now, the Congo, Uganda, places in Eastern Europe, the Balkans. The UN is always on the ground, including, well, not so much in Iraq because of direct attacks there, but they do a lot of humanitarian work, and of course with U.S. aid and the U.S. military, people tend to think of the U.S. military as solely a aggressive military arm, artillery and such, but the U.S. military does an enormous amount of aid work in working with the UN and U.S. aid to feed countries. They are essentially the way that a lot of these things are transported. Now, obviously, the UN will do some of that work, and NGOs or non-governmental organizations will pick up and try to fill in the blanks where the U.S. military, United Nations, and other international groups are unable to fill the void. Still, however, places like Sudan, you'll find an active genocide with Bashir trying to kill all the animist black African peoples of Darfur, while the largely Muslim or Islamic government takes a political maneuver with trying to clear that land for oil. Some make it out to be purely a Wahhabist, jihadist type action against Darfur. It's not entirely that. It's really more about resources, although that's a debatable topic. There is definitely, especially among the Janjaweed, a very religious push for them, a religious encouragement from their point of view to drive off the animists, or for lack of a better term, the pagan pantheistic groups that believe in the nature gods, tribal gods of the past. So it gives you a little idea of what United Nations does. It's still, like the League of Nations, has its limitations. So we discussed the dropping of the atomic bomb, Truman's decision to drop that, MacArthur accepts unconditional surrender from the Japanese. The Soviet Union declares war on Japan in 1945 after the bombs dropped. That lets Japan know that you have no friends here. And that concludes our discussion of World War II. Obviously, these are just rather straightforward lectures. I'm not adding a lot of visuals. So if you would like that, please request it. I will add those. So email me, text message, or call. And I hope you do very well on the CSET exams that are coming up for my high school students. Take notes from these, and we'll look forward to doing well on the midterms and final exams, using these as a way to take notes and refresh your memory. Again, call, email, talk to you soon. Bye for now.